Happy Friday, everyone. John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of Brainscratch for today, February 2nd, 2018. Hope you had a nice week. This case is really intriguing. It kind of mixes a few different cases that we've had before in terms of what's going on with the story. We've had cases before about unidentified bodies being found. We've had at least one case before about someone being stuck in a chimney, and that is the episode about Joshua Maddox that we did a couple of months back. But this case is about someone being found that was stuck in a chimney that is an unidentified person still to this day. And there's even a bit more of an interesting question because originally this body was found wearing women's clothes, but the analysis that came out seemed to suggest that this is the body of a man. A lot of questions that we have looking into today's case, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it, starting with a image that was created supposedly of what the person would look like. Now, when the remains were found, they were skeletonized, so this is, a bit of an artistic rendering of what the person actually would look like. They did find some of his hair. I've seen different reports. They're saying that it was either 4 inches long or possibly up to 6 inches long. So you can see, I think they've tried to mimic that hairstyle on this bust as well. But let's go ahead and start with a part of NamUs that we don't use too frequently here on the channel. It's called identifyus.org, and it is part of the NamUs system. This is part of what makes NamUs so amazing, in my opinion, is they have one database specifically for unidentified bodies. They have another database for missing persons. Occasionally, you can get those records to match up, and then you solve both cases in one shot. And of course, DNA analysis is a big part of that. I know at NamUs they've been working real hard to do a lot of DNA analysis. I believe there is no charge for them to do DNA analysis at this point. I know they had a little bit of a wrinkle that they bumped into about a year ago, but that's been worked out. So I'm really curious because there's an aspect about DNA analysis with this case that I'm really not sure if it's going on or not. And as a matter of fact, there's a handful of questions I have that I don't know if I can say that investigators have really shaken every tree that they could in terms of discovering who this person is. But I don't know. It's hard to tell because I don't have access to their files, of course. But in terms of what they've released publicly, I think there are a few details that might help us, and we'll kind of go through those as we go along here. But this is reaching back a little bit. This is a case from 1989. The date that this body was found was September 3rd of 89. We can see the history here in terms of when the record was created and the last time it was modified. Created in 2009, last modified in September of 2016. They've got contact information here. They've even got someone that they have excluded. And typically when I look into these records, I see a lot of exclusions. I'm kind of surprised here to only see one person excluded so far on this case. But I think it's tough because according to the NamUs record here, they don't have a DNA profile on hand here. And I believe that the NamUs system has some automated checks where it compares DNA against both sides of that database I was mentioning earlier. So without that, I think it's going to be a bit harder to rule people out. So that might be why we're not seeing too many people in there. Estimated age, adult to pre-40. Other estimations I've seen on this, 18 to 35 years old seems to be the most common range that is talked about. This is a white male, at least as is being discussed here. We'll get into some more details on that later. Weight, they cannot estimate. Like I said, these were skeletonized remains, though when we start talking about the chimney, we're going to quickly learn that they were probably very lean. This is a pretty small area that they fit themselves into or that they were possibly put into, but we'll get into more details on that. And for height, they have 67 inches estimated. This was not an intact skeleton, so obviously they try to lay it out. They try to get it as close to complete and then take a measurement off that. So they're assuming somewhere around 5'7". I've seen a range as low as 5'5", and it could possibly even go an inch or two higher than this. So just keep that in mind. They are noting here that all parts were recovered, but they are saying for the body condition that it's not recognizable, partial skeletal parts only, which is strange. I don't know why it's saying partial down there, but up here it's saying all parts were recovered. From other things I've been reading on this, it seems like the entire skeleton was recovered. So Circumstances. It was September 3rd, 1989, when the owners of the Good and Loud music store on University Avenue, halfway between Madison and Middleton, found a pile of bones. In case you don't know, that is Madison, Wisconsin. A skull and rotting clothing at the base of the store's chimney were basically found down there. They had removed a boiler in the basement to repair a leak, and they saw a skull through a pipe connecting the boiler to the chimney. I'm sure that freaked out the person that found that. For hair color, like I mentioned, a sample of the hair was found in the chimney. The hair was brown. For eye color, we do not know. In terms of other distinctive characteristics, we're talking skeletonized remains. So there's not a whole lot going on here. We don't know of any tattoos. We don't know of any scars. We don't know if there was piercings. Really, the only thing we know about the skeleton that was found was the pelvis was broken, and they're estimating that it was broken sometime around the same time that the person passed away. So keep that in mind when we're starting to talk about theories on this case. Fingerprint information, of course, none available there. For clothing and accessories, we get a description here, but there's a bit of a better description that we're going to get from another website, so I'm going to bump past that. Dental information, yes, they do have complete dental charting. I've seen some references to it on other websites, so they do understand the dental information very strongly in this case. Unfortunately, that still hasn't helped them make a match. And for DNA, this is the one that's really, really surprising to me. Sample is currently not available, and I'm not exactly sure why, but as we crack into this case, maybe we'll get a better idea. And of course, they have images here, including the one that we started this episode with. Let's move over to the DoeNetwork at DoeNetwork.org for people that do research instances where bodies are discovered and they don't have the identity. DoeNetwork is a very strong resource. I see it come up frequently on other forums. Here, let's get some more details. Location of discovery, just want to make sure I nailed that with you guys. Madison in Dane County of Wisconsin. I've actually been to Madison once before. Estimated date of death, 2 months to 2 years. It's really tough because when they find the remains in this state, it's kind of hard to tell how long they've been in there, apparently. That is a pretty wide range, and of course, really adds to the considerations when we start talking about theories that could have happened around this. Skeletal was the state of the remains. For cause of death, they have it listed as accident or homicide. Of course, we'll talk more about each of those theories as we go forward. Once again, they're noting here, DNA not available. I'm not sure why. We know they have bones. We know they have teeth. Should be pretty easy for them to get DNA. Admittedly, in 1989, that was not quite as popular as it is now. We'll get some more details on that also as we go forward. For clothing and personal items, a sleeveless paisley dress with a matching belt, a long-sleeved button-down shirt that may have been made of Oxford-type cloth, a medium-sized White Stag brand shaggy pile sweater, low-heeled pointed shoes. He was wearing one pair of socks and carrying another pair. He was not wearing underwear. In terms of jewelry, the body was found with a German Iron Cross medallion and other items that were found in there. They're listing these as personal items, a butter knife and a pocket comb. I'm kind of curious to know how those items were discovered. Were they actually in, the pocket of the sweater or, in the clothing in some way with the body? Because I have some doubts, particularly about the butter knife, of it being actually related to this particular person. But we don't have a ton of great information in terms of details on where those items were found. So as always, I will have all the links in the description box below. If you do happen to have some information on this case and need contact information or case numbers or anything like that, please use the DoeNetwork link. They have a lot of good info down here, or the NamUs link also, which will be down below. Moving over to the Wisconsin State Journal, which did a lot of writing on this case, really tried to keep it in the public's mind year after year as this case went unsolved. Let's get some more details here about what's going on with this. Jim Gran, a retired Madison police detective, said, quote, "I still remember going through the bones that day. I was thinking, I hope you've got a well-laminated driver's license or something, because otherwise we've got a real challenge." On the afternoon of September 3rd, 1989, the new owner of a University Avenue music store was in the basement making repairs on the chimney when he discovered a human skeleton and alerted police. What I'm curious about in that statement is a new owner. And we do know a little bit of history about this building, that it was previously a Christian bookstore. So I don't know if this is the new owner in terms of getting the music business started, or if this is someone that bought the music company as it was and is now taking ownership. Unfortunately, those details just aren't really public. Prior to the music store moving into the building in the 5200 block of University Avenue, the occupant was a Christian bookstore whose owner expressed shock when told of the skeleton in the chimney. There's just some aspect about this when we're talking about someone who it seems like was cross-dressing, and knowing that the previous business was a Christian bookstore. I don't know. There's something about that that's kind of just hooking in the back of my mind. Is there possibly a connection there? I would really hope that they did some questioning of the previous owner, not only the previous owner, but previous employees of that location, because who knows what type of person, if this body was placed in the chimney, might have done that over the years. So at least through this article, we can see that the owner was at least spoken to. Obviously, they're saying the owner expressed shock. I don't know if that really takes them quite off my list of persons of interest, my personal list of persons of interest. But let's continue here. The revelations brought the TV show Hard Copy to Madison the following week. Unfortunately, I tried every which way I could to find that episode of Hard Copy. If any of you happen to bump into a link to that specific episode, please share it with the rest of us in the comments down below. I could not find one, and I gave it a real good shot. So the producer said, quote, "This is one of the strangest ones we've ever seen. The more you get into it, the more bizarre it gets." Certainly true with my experience with it as well. But the national exposure yielded little of substance for police. Basically, I'm sure they got a bunch of tips around the airing of it. Those tips were worked and nothing really panned out from those. In terms of the chimney, here's some more details. It had 3 exits. It was clay lined, and the 3 exits were the top, of course. Farther down, there was a connection, also 11.75 inches in diameter. So first of all, let's talk about the size of this thing. This guy had to fit down a chimney that is smaller than 12 inches in diameter. So that should give you some idea of the size of the person, assuming that his body was whole when it was dropped in there. But I have seen no one really giving consideration to the fact that it wasn't when it was put in there. And when you think about the clothing was found in there, along with the skeletonized remains, it seems to suggest that the body was indeed whole when it entered the chimney. In terms of the exits, so you've got the top, you've got the connection that was a bit farther down, and then at the bottom there was a clean out pipe that was also about 12 inches in diameter, just under. Only a small person could fit into such an opening. Police at first worked the missing persons lists. Then forensic scientists worked on descriptions that led to cross-referencing with descriptions of male residents of the Dane County Jail. Dental records were compared. Lists of small and small-time burglars were compared. Obviously, they're considering that maybe this was a burglary attempt. As a matter of fact, one of the theories that kind of kicks around is, was this man potentially dressed as a woman as a disguise while he was trying to get into the record store to steal things? What's curious about that is, if you're going to try to conduct a burglary like that, are you going to take a butter knife? Are you going to take, a comb? Just the items that were found don't seem to suggest that to me. If I personally was going to try to burglarize a store by going down the chimney, first thing I'm going to have is a flashlight. And of course, there was nothing of that mentioned. So I don't know if the burglary theory holds up a whole lot. Car towing records and abandoned car records were also examined. Photographs of the jewelry and clothing were distributed. Experts at the Smithsonian Institution even reconstructed the victim's face. That's where the image came from that we saw. The true crime and mystery television shows featured the search. Someone even based a novel on the case. The case pops up in a few different books. We're going to jump over to one of them right now. This one is called Bones, a Forensic Detective's Casebook. It's by Douglas H. Ubelacker and Henry Scammell. Many women are widest at the hips, and one obvious possibility was that the fractures were associated with the cramming of the body into the chimney opening. Keep in mind, the only thing that was broken in terms of the skeleton was the hips, and it's kind of an interesting place when you consider if this was an accident. You know, another one of the theories was, did someone strike this person with a car and then try to hide their body? Well, all we've got here are pretty much damage to the pelvis and nothing else. There is no damage noted anywhere else. So that would have been a pretty amazing car strike for the person to not have, possibly fractured another bone in their arm, or maybe even cracked a part of their skull or something like that. So once again, for that theory, I'm not sure how much we can put into it as well. The remains were examined by an anthropologist, a forensic pathologist, a forensic odontologist, and the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. Even though their findings generally agreed, they seemed so inconsistent with the rest of the evidence that Detective Jim Gran of the Madison Police Department requested an additional opinion from the FBI. Based on my examination of the skull and pelvic bones, I was able to confirm the conclusions of the other specialists that the body was not that of a woman, but a man. A tentative new scenario emerged as a result of the forensic findings. The victim, who was between the ages of 22 and, unfortunately it's whited out, but I believe they'd say 35 there, may have been engaged in prostitution. So here's another different theory for you guys. The pubic bones could have been broken as the result of having his pelvis stomped by an irate customer on discovery of his gender. Considering the location of the fractures, that might be a likely explanation. There is no way to tell from the remains whether he was alive or dead when his body was forced into the chimney for the drop to the cellar. That seems to be probably the most popular opinion that I see coming up time and again. Essentially, you imagine a scenario where this is a prostitute, this is a man posing as a woman, he finds a John, possibly takes the John to this parking lot that is around the music store or maybe behind the music store. Right behind the music store is actually a barn, so a little bit of a private area. Let's jump to a map real quick so we can get a better idea. This is what's there currently. So where you see this forward dental, this is the lot where that building was. But thanks to the magic of Google Maps, we can pop it back to at least 2007. And you'll see it's a completely different building that is there at that time. And it even has the sign on it, the music sign still on it, Good and Loud Music. So if we take a look behind the building a little bit, we got to step back just a little bit for the view here. You'll see that there is really nothing quite behind the building. It does look like there's more parking back there because I can see a car, and right behind the building, a little bit of ways from it, is a barn. So could have been a bit of a private area, maybe a place where someone might be, if they're a prostitute, maybe they're looking for a quiet corner. That might be a decent location. Unfortunately, the quality of these images from 2007, it's pretty grainy, and I can't really make out where the actual chimney is. I've kind of hit it from both sides and tried to look at it both ways. The only thing I get is kind of near this tree behind this side, I'm seeing some kind of structure back there. It doesn't look quite square enough to be a chimney, but it's something that is certainly sticking out of the roof that seems to be the same color of the roof. It's kind of hard to make out in this image too. These images are just really terrible, but yeah, I can't quite find where this chimney is with how blocky these images are, but at least this gives you an idea of the area. And you can see we've got, pretty decent traffic. This seems to be probably a pretty well-traveled road. Maybe the car accident theory isn't entirely crazy. One other thing that I wanted to point out, which might explain the butter knife, is it is right next to a restaurant. It's right next to a Perkins. I'd be very curious if investigators checked the make of that model knife and ran it by someone that either worked at Perkins or at least would have the knowledge to know what type of silverware they were using. I have a feeling that that butter knife, who knows, maybe someone borrowed it at some point, walked it back here. Maybe some kids took it from there, threw it up into the chimney. I'm really not convinced that the butter knife was necessarily part of what was taken in there by the person that was stuck in the chimney. And, we've got very close proximity to a very good source of butter knives here, but that's really speculative. Let me just say this is my opinion coming off the top of my head. All right, so there was another book that also featured a write-up on this. This one's called 101 Wisconsin Unsolved Mysteries by Marv Lucic. And we get a little information here as well. Police ruled out the theory that the victim went down the chimney to burglarize the business because the chimney was too narrow. Now, this is really the only place where I see that police have ruled it out. Even the pretty decent coverage we're getting from the local paper doesn't really ever tell us this. So I'm not sure where this information's coming from, but it is interesting. And like I said, I kind of ruled it out too. If I was going to go down a chimney, I'd have a flashlight, especially if I'm going into a business in the middle of the night to steal something. I would certainly have a flashlight. Would-be burglars have been rescued by the firefighters after failed attempts to use the Santa Claus method of breaking into a business. You'd be surprised. If you want an interesting read for an afternoon, take a look at that. There's a lot of people that try to go down chimneys, and it does not end well. They're extremely dangerous. We talked about that a little on the previous case that I covered. Just the way that they're designed. First of all, it's not always a straight drop. Sometimes you get to sections where it narrows. It is really, really risky. If any of you out there have ever thought about it, please don't. It's terribly, terribly risky. This write-up brings up another interesting theory here. The business is not far from State Street, the scene of Madison's wild Halloween parties during the 1980s. Was the victim a party reveler who climbed to the roof and somehow fell to his death? I think that's a really good consideration, especially when we talk about the fact that this person didn't have women's underclothing or undergarments on under this. It seems like it could be a costume. We're going to see some photos. The shoes, to me, I don't know enough about women's fashion in the late 80s, but the shoes to me seem like kind of like a thrift store pickup. They don't seem like something that, especially someone that young, would necessarily be wearing. So I happen to put a little stock into the thought that perhaps this is a Halloween costume. Now, another possible explanation for the lack of undergarments could be brought up with the prostitution angle, because what if they were in the act when the client found out that this was indeed a man and became angry, and the underwear was already removed basically at that point. But then would he put the clothes on this person and then take them to the chimney? I don't know. It's just another consideration, but certainly thinking, is this a Halloween costume? There might be something to that. I can't quite let it go, let's just say. Jumping over to another article at Wisconsin State Journal. This one is from 1993. Homicide detective James Gran determined that only a very slim body could have inched or been stuffed down that chimney. Once in, no one could have gotten out. It's once again mentioning the other pair of socks. That's another thing with the Halloween costume theory. Could he have been using socks to stuff his top, basically, to make him look like a woman? It's kind of strange to me that they wouldn't have found two other pairs of socks. But once again, we're not getting details on how these socks were arranged. Was it just one pair of socks that he had rolled up separately and was using one for the left side and one for the right? I don't know. But considering we don't have a purse here, we don't have a lot of personal effects, why carry another pair of socks? Possibly, if we think of the burglary angle, was he going to use the socks as gloves to make sure that he wasn't leaving fingerprints anywhere? I don't know. It's just another interesting question in this mystery. Also found in the chimney were an iron cross medallion, a butter knife, and a pocket comb. So I think this is a good time to take a look at the items that were found, starting with the shoes. And the other thing I wonder about this picture of these shoes, first of all, the style of the shoes looks a little bit older to me, but I think that's hard to determine because of the deterioration that has obviously gone on with the shoes here. But that is a statement in itself. These shoes look really, really deteriorated. If you would show me this picture and ask me, hey, John, when do you think these shoes are from? I would say they look to me like they could be from the 1900s or something. They look really, really old. The style looks like it could be a bit older. And that's something that I'm also wondering about this investigation. Why haven't investigators released the information of what make and model these shoes are? I'm pretty sure that you could figure out who the manufacturer is. We could at least get a range on when these shoes were manufactured and maybe tighten up that 2-year to 2-month time frame that we're talking about here. But I don't know, guys. These shoes look really old to me. And once again, I question, is this something that a young woman in the late 80s would have wore? I really don't know. Here we have a shot of the comb that was found. We can see it is also broken in a few places. I guess it's not one of those unbreakable combs. And a question I have off this is just, once again, how do we know that this was actually hers? These combs pop up everywhere. I've found them in the strangest of places. And as a kid in the 80s walking around, you could find these combs at random at any particular place. They were super cheap. And once again, if we're considering this theory that perhaps the comb and the butter knife are not related to the body, is this something that some kids just threw up into a chimney, just trying to have fun, behind a store? I really don't know. We don't have a lot of convincing information, unfortunately, to push me in a different direction of knowing or believing that that was necessarily with the body. It'd be totally different if they were like, these were found in the pockets. And unfortunately, we're not hearing that. Here is the necklace that was found. And when I first saw this, I was kind of like, whoa, isn't that like a symbol for German military? Let's take a look at Wikipedia just to get some clarification on the Iron Cross. It was a military decoration in the Kingdom of Prussia and later in the German Empire and Nazi Germany. It was normally used as a military decoration only. Now, through reading about this on numerous threads, I think it was on Web Sleuths, one person there was suggesting that there is a secret organization at the university that's nearby that is known as the Iron Cross. And I was able to research that. And yes, that organization really isn't as secret as it used to be. It's kind of a student group at this point. But that person was saying that members of that organization are known to wear an Iron Cross. I couldn't find anything to support that piece of the story. So it's kind of interesting to me that this item would be worn by this person and it would be in such close proximity to a place that has an organization known as the Iron Cross. Is it coincidence? I certainly think it's possible. We're talking about a symbol that has certainly been used and has really become much more popular ever since. I mean, look at any motorcycle or tattoo shop. You're probably going to see some rendition of this somewhere. But I don't know. It's once again just raising a lot of questions and a very tough mystery to crack. At first, it was thought the victim was simply a burglar who got stuck in a chimney, but the clothes, the height of the chimney, which they're saying is 27 feet, which I think would really stand out in that photo, but I just can't find it on Google Maps. The broken pelvis is as if from a beating, point to murder. So this is the closest thing where I'm seeing that perhaps the police are thinking that this was not burglary. But once again, we're not getting a definitive statement here from the detective himself saying that. We're just getting the author kind of pontificating about that. The remains of the, quote, Chimney Guy, as Gran calls him, have not been buried. Gran is keeping the remains until the state crime laboratory staff is up and running with new DNA testing facilities. Keep in mind, this article was written in 1993, so they're just talking about getting their DNA testing facilities in place at this time. The Chimney Guy will then get tested before the remains are put to rest, Gran said. Keep that in mind. This is their plan back in 93. Quote, "We haven't had any leads all year," he said. "The DNA test will join the dental charts as evidence that one day may be used to give the Chimney Guy a name and maybe his killer justice." Well, we already know, at least from the records that we saw at DoeNetwork and NamUs, there doesn't seem to be a DNA profile, at least it's been relayed to them. What happened, I do not know, but we can see it's clearly the detective's intent at this point to get that DNA test done and to get that information saved somewhere. And I can't say that it actually happened, and I don't know why. And once again here, it seems like it's the intent of that detective to get that DNA testing done and then to put the remains to rest. Did the remains actually get put to rest? We'll have some more information on that very soon, like right now. December 14th, 2010 is when this article was published, once again at Wisconsin State Journal. "The remains of a slender man in women's clothes have cooled for 21 years at the Dane County morgue, unidentified since he was found at the bottom of a chimney at a music store on University Avenue." This article is about several unidentified people being stored at this area. They also note here, across the country, federal figures from 2007 show that in a typical year, medical examiners and coroners handle approximately 4,400 unidentified human decedent cases, 1,000 of which remain unidentified after 1 year, which I don't know what the stats are now, but that's back in 2007. And that is pretty scary to me that, you're racking up essentially 1,000 new unknown people in this country per year. But there's no other information here about why the Chimney Guy still is sitting there, why the DNA test hasn't been done, why they haven't put him to rest in some way. No real explanation that I can find in terms of any of that. And I'm just really scratching my brain on this one. I don't know why that DNA test hasn't been done. And in 2012, we do get another shake on this case, once again written up at the Wisconsin State Journal, March 5th of 2012. Laura Zimmerman remembers a face, but not a name. She believes a man she worked with in the legislature more than 22 years ago may be the skeleton in the chimney. Last month, Zimmerman's memory was passed along to the Madison Police Department, resurrecting the mystery with a tip that has warmed up a cold case and already has been assigned to a police detective. It also may persuade authorities to expand biological tests on the unidentified bones, which are locked in a cabinet in the Dane County Medical Examiner's office. So here we get confirmation in 2012. So we're now only 6 years ago. The remains are still with the medical examiner, and they're hoping that this will nudge them to do more tests on those remains. I'm sure one of those tests is the standard DNA extraction. So I'm telling you guys, it's driving me a little nuts. I don't know what the thing is here with not getting the DNA done. As a matter of fact, I'm going to reach out to a friend of mine at NamUs and ask specifically about this case and see if they can get some information about how come there is no DNA record in their system for this particular case. Maybe there's something they could do to nudge it along, especially considering that, as far as I know, there is no charge for doing this test if they would get it to NamUs for them to conduct it. So I'm really not sure what's going on here. One of the things that the test could help us clear up is to conclusively confirm the gender of the victim. If the victim is identified, that opens the field for possible motives and suspects. Now, we do have several expert opinions saying that they believe that this is a male. However, we'll see a quote from the detective down here. Let me just jump to it real quick. Police are 93% certain it was a man. So in the earlier articles, it was a very strong opinion. And in this later article, which this is pretty much the latest one about this case that seems to exist, there is now a hint of, well, we're not completely sure. And that changes the landscape for this investigation substantially. So I think it's imperative that they really get that DNA test, confirm the gender of the victim, and that might point them in a completely different direction. They might find out this is indeed a woman. There's obviously a 7% chance of that, according to them. Back to the woman, Zimmerman. When she saw a photo of the reconstruction, Zimmerman thought she recognized a former page, one of the dozens of young people who scurry around the Capitol fetching sandwiches for legislators and filling water pitchers. Now, the article goes on. Basically, she can't remember the page's name. They show some photos to her boss, who supposedly she had spoken to and said at the time, and a year after the body was found, and said, hey, doesn't that remind you of someone? They spoke to that boss. He now says, I don't remember that conversation at all. They drag up an old picture, a group photo of the Pages from the late 70s, and the author of this article thinks that there is a likeness match between one of the Pages. The former boss thinks, yeah, that's a possibility. But then they go back to Zimmerman. They show her the photo, and she's like, nope, that's not the person that I'm talking about. And there's other Pages that they reach out to that are in those photos, and they say, no, we don't really see a resemblance there either. So ultimately, this whole lead, at least from where this article stands, comes out as a bust. You have a woman who thinks that she remembers this guy's face from, a couple of decades before. And there's no articles really following this up. Once again, kind of a dead end in this mystery. So that is it for the facts in this case. There are a couple of threads that are really interesting. I'll have those down below. There is a good Reddit conversation about this going on. And of course, as I mentioned before, web sleuths. But outside of that, what theories are we looking at? We're looking at, was this possibly a cross-dressing prostitute that was murdered? Was this possibly a Halloween costume? Was this possibly a disguise for someone that was looking to rob the store? Is this related to the Christian bookstore in some way? Could this have happened before that was actually a music store? The items that we saw seem to be pretty badly degraded. Of course, you're talking about a chimney, so I'm sure those items were being exposed to outside elements, as well as probably a bit of severe heat throughout the years or months that the remains were in there. A lot of interesting angles on this case, but this is where I turn it over to you, brain scratchers. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Let me know your theories. If you find any other links to information that I didn't cover here, please go ahead and drop it in the comments so others can read up on that and we can all learn about this case together. I'm really hoping that there's some development on this case. This is a really tough case to search because you don't even have a person's name. When I originally started looking at this case, I only found a couple of articles. Luckily, a brain scratcher that lived close to this did a bunch of research, sent it over to me, said, John, I think this is one that would be worth covering. They didn't want me to get their name out there, but I just want to give you a personal thank you. Your research really helped me pull today's episode together and come to a much better understanding of this case. So thank you to that brain scratcher. And thank you to the rest of you that have spent some time with me here today. And I'm pretty sure many of you out there are scratching your brains like I am. Where is this DNA test? As a matter of fact, as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm kicking off that email to NamUs and see if there's something that can be done about that. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you back here on Monday. I hope you have a nice weekend. Come on back to the Lord and Arts channel. I'll see you there.